Hi folks, so I'm out here in the garage with the Sansui 9090 where the one I replaced the outputs on and is now working. The owner wanted a set of bananas put in here. So my plan is, because whenever I modify something, I really don't like doing that, I always make sure that it can be put back to stock. So I'm not going to make any holes in here. I'm not going to drill anything. My plan is, since there's a problem with the speaker selector switch and only B and C I believe are working, is I'm going to take these two terminal strips out and I've cut some pieces of aluminum. I'm going to mount these from the inside with dual bananas on like this. It'll be left and right like that. I'm going to utilize these screws, and because I'm using a piece of aluminum here, I have taken a piece of clear heat shrink and put it around the positive terminal. The negative doesn't matter. Negatives go directly to the chassis, so they can touch. That doesn't matter. The positive is a whole nother story. So I wanted to make sure that was well insulated, and I'm going to paint these black. So before I do that, I want to drill the holes that we're going to use to mount it. And I'm going to use a screw and a nut. So I can use a slightly smaller screw and not mess up the threads here. So if somebody in the future wants to put these back in, they will be taped inside and they simply can be mounted back on. Okay, so in preparation for removing the terminals, I made some P-Touch labels so I can label the wires, and that'll help me or whoever in the future may be putting this back to stock to know where to wire the wires to the terminal strips. So I'm just going to cut them now. I'll tag them, and I'm going to put a little bit of heat shrink on the end of each positive one, because you do not want these inadvertently touching ground, and even a cut end will still have a bit exposed. Murphy's Law says that a little bit will get you in trouble sooner or later. So I'm going to do that, and then once I have that out, I'll be able to stick one of these in there, or both of them, and get them marked up. These aren't cut perfectly. I'm not great at working with metal or wood, but they're going to be mounted on the inside. You're not going to see that. So it should look fine when I'm done. I didn't take a lot of care when I cut them knowing that. But I just want to get them drilled out where they're going to mount on the back here. So that way I can paint them and let them dry for several days while I get ready to put them in. Okay, so here's what we have so far. I have two misshapen plates that are going to go inside. I shot them black. And there's so many different shades of white and black, far more than I ever thought. I used what I had. It's a little glossy, but again, you're not going to see a lot of it because this is going to cover the bulk and they're going in from the back. I made the holes large, so I had a lot of adjustment range here to get these things to look like they're centered. And I also put a piece of clear heat shrink here so it doesn't short out. I'm going to tighten these down and put some Loctite on the threads. I made some short jumpers here, and as you can see, I put heat shrink here because I don't know how many times I've done this, and maybe you have too, where you solder two wires together and go, oh crap, I forgot to put the heat shrink on. So now I try and do it beforehand. I used to have the same problem when I was playing guitar, and I try to put a new end on the guitar cable. I'd solder it on, it'll look good, like, ah, that looks great. Then you realize you left the sleeve and the screw-on cap off. So I try to keep myself out of trouble this way. These are for the grounds. I made them a little longer. Because here's what we got. I have these wires that are tagged, B left and B right. These are going to be the outputs. One's going to go to each one of these. And the grounds here are going to go all the way to the bottom. And I'm going to move the camera so hopefully we can get a little better look here. But the grounds are going to go down in here. So I'm going to solder right to here, fold these out of the way so there's no shorting hazard. These can touch ground because they are ground. And I also, as I mentioned I was going to do, I put some heat shrink on the ends here so that even though they're clipped, there's a small chance they could touch something and ground out, and I just don't want to take the chance. So that's what I did to these. I put some heat shrink on, capped them off, don't have to worry about that anymore. So now I just have to put everything together. And by the way, these are what came out. I'm going to put them in a Ziploc bag and tie wrap them with some wires, keep them out of the way, keep them in the unit. Somebody wants to put this back to stock, they'll have everything they need. Here's the screws, and I'm using smaller screws even though the threads are on here. So we're going to utilize the same holes. There won't be any new holes drilled, and it should work fine. It should look acceptable, and that's what we're going to run with. So I'm going to put everything together and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, so I decided my best course of action was to mount the plates in the back and then put the terminals on, and that way I can make sure they appear to be centered. That's why I made these holes bigger than they need to be. I wound up having a problem with the heat shrink I used because the wire got hot enough to shrink the heat shrink, and I wound up having to cut some of that clear stuff I used before, roll it back on this wire, and then everything worked out. But the trick my old friend showed me was to take a set of hemostats and grab the nut you want to get. And now, since they're flexible, this doesn't destroy them. I really thought it would, but I guess there's some kind of spring steel, and they go right back to where they were. But this will hold the nut, and you can get it behind here and screw it in. My friend Lyle was probably 10 years younger than me and 10 times smarter than I'll ever be. I don't know where he got that from, but it's a great trick. So I'm going to mount the plates, and then we're going to mount these and put the terminals on. I also need to put the grounds on, so I will probably do that right after I get the plates mounted. Okay, so I'm back at this Sansui. I went to a wedding over on the west coast of Florida here, and I have to admit I saw something I hadn't seen in years, and that was 11 p.m. so I'm still a little bit out of it. I'm not used to staying up late. Anyway, this is what the two dual bananas look like mounted on the back. As you recall, we removed two of these spring clip assemblies, whatever you want to refer to them as, the old speaker terminals. And I'm going to put those in a Ziploc bag and tie wrap them to the chassis, so if somebody wants to return this to stock, they can. There have been no additional holes drilled in here. There are threaded inserts on these guys, so I didn't have to worry about buggering up the threads in the back panel. I don't like modifying things, but when I do, I try to make sure that they are 100% reversible. This is vintage audio equipment, and with vintage cars, even having the stock radio adds value. So I want to be able to have somebody, if they wish in the future, to return this to stock. So anyway, I have the bottom one wired up. I have to wire up the top one now, and then it's pretty much just a matter of reassembly. So let me turn this off. We'll put these back on. Before I do, I'll show you a quick pic of what the back looks like. Okay, so I've got the terminal strips mounted and wired up, and I wanted to put the back on and test it with the dim bulb. I had a real problem trying to get the back on. Now, I'm not sure how well you can see down here, but the back is bent. This thing's had a hard life. It's bent out a little bit, and I couldn't get the screws started here. So I said, well, let me try the other end, which is not bent, and still had no luck. In fact, let's just crank this up a little. Couldn't get the screws in here either. And what I determined was, I remembered I hadn't taken the bottom off, and that the cover has to go in between the bottom and the frame or the chassis. So once I did that, everything fit. I got these 4 screws in, 2 up here, 2 down here. I have some labels I've made I'm going to put on here. I just want to test it real quick with the dim bulb to make sure nothing's shorted. I gave a quick check just to make sure have my meter in continuity mode, and just wanted to make sure that we didn't have anything grounded. Now these should be ground, and they are, but these should not, and they look okay. So I've got it plugged into the dim bulb tester. We'll flip it on real quick here, and it looks fine. I think it came out of protection, but frankly, with the air conditioners running out here, it did. It's just really hard to hear. Sorry about all the noise, but I'm in South Florida, and the temperatures here have basically two variations, hot and hotter. So anyhow, I'm going to put the heatsink assembly back on here. We'll give it a final test, finish reassembling it, mount these labels on there, and this guy will be done. Okay, just a quick note. I just mounted the heatsink assembly, and the heatsink assembly only fits on one way. I had it 180 degrees off, and all the screws on the outside, on the left and right when it's standing properly, they all lined up, no problem. But there are screws that go in here. You might be able to see that one where I have my finger. There's a screw in here. A screw here, screw here, screw here, screw here, screw here. None of them lined up. Finally, I took a piece of metal and poked in, and they weren't lined up with the hole, so I rotated the heatsink assembly, and then everything lined up. So this has a definite up and down. I just wanted to point that out if any one of you is going to work on any of these. And as I always say, if you're doing any work like this yourself, you're doing so at your own risk. I am simply showing you what I have done. All right, so I'm going to mount the cover on the heatsink assembly, and I just wanted to point out that I keep all my empty Mouser parts bags because they're excellent for storing parts. I have the old terminal strips for the speakers. I'm going to tie wrap inside. That's also an old Mouser parts bag. They're good little Ziplocs, and I don't throw anything out. Anyone who's seen my garage or my car or anything else will know I never throw anything out. But there's a reason for that. Why should I buy Ziplocs when they're giving to me when I buy parts? Okay, so I have the cover over the heatsink assembly, I have the labels over the new terminal strips here, and in the back, if you can see this, let me unlock this and raise it up a little. I have tie wrapped the old speaker terminals in here to these plastic standoffs to keep them inside the unit, keep them from flopping around in the breeze. So we're going to check this thing out, see what we get here. All right, so now that I have dual bananas on here, it makes it a lot easier for my applications because my entire bench setup is set to use dual bananas. My dummy lows, my test speakers, so I have dual banana to dual banana cables here. So I just plugged the right one in here and the left one in here. Now these dual bananas have a tab here. This tab denotes ground, so if you make these yourself the way I made these, make sure that your positive goes here, your negative or black terminal goes here, and that the tabs always go when plugging in to the black terminal. Makes it a lot easier. You can just feel them and see if you got it right. So now we turn this on, clicks out of protection, reach around the front here, and we have good signal. So now I'll crank it up a little bit, see what we get here. I've mentioned this, but the clipping you see occasionally is the auto ranging function of the distortion analyzer. So there we go. We've got 9478. This unit hasn't been rebuilt, but it still performs just fine. That imbalance is pretty much inaudible. Like I said, a lot of it has to do with the uneven wear of the potentiometer for the volume control. So anyway, this guy is all set. Everything's working. I'm going to put the cover back on, contact the owner and tell him it's all done. And as always, I thank everyone for watching this, and I like giving back to the community that has truly given me so much. Thanks a lot, folks. Have a good one.